Well, look who's doing a couch video after all this time. Well, I just finished The Pillars of the Earth, and I wanted to give you my immediate first impressions upon finishing it. Um, and I had some thoughts near the end where uh, I might go into a little bit why I think this refocused the way I am going to read books. And sometimes you go kind of in and out of this cycle as I'm reading, but it really reminded me, first and foremost, why I like reading books, and that's for the enjoyment of it. I think sometimes I go into books and uh, kind of thinking about like the checklist sort of stuff that that often people bring up, like, are the characters developed? Do they have a good arc? Do they change? And the reason I'm kind of thinking about this, and it's not to call anyone out, but on the Discord about The Will of the Many, which was one of my favorite books last year or this year, is someone mentioned that, in a buddy read, that the main character Vis is just such a boring character because they don't change, or they always do things right. And that's fine if that's kind of what you're going through in a book. But I think first and foremost, uh like, I will see a lot of people sometimes, and this is like not pointed any which way, but as people are reading books, if a character seems too one note, or if things seem to be going too slow, like we haven't had an action scene for a while, if it's a trope, people are like, it feels like people are really sometimes going into these books like trying to find a checklist reason not to like a book, rather than just sit back. If it's a trope, like, uh, just sit back and try to enjoy it. And by the end of it, then try to maybe nitpick the stuff that maybe brought them out of it. Now, the reason why I'm thinking of this is by the end of Pillars of the Earth, which is a big book, it's 1,000 pages on this big, like, it's a big book. And it doesn't necessarily, like, it's not a fantasy book, it's a historical nonfiction. And you could say that often it's slow. I mean, a lot of people would probably say that because a big part of this book is this creation of a cathedral. And there's like a rival group nearby. There are priests involved, and there's like rival priests as well. There's a lot of backstory that has to do with just getting this stinking cathedral built. And just to sidetrack for a second, as I was going through, and by the very end of it, I was going back and just going to Wikipedia and seeing if some of these things really happened. And even though there are a lot of uh, total fiction, like, the characters aren't real, a lot of them, there are a lot of these instances that actually do happen. And you get some amazing reveal. Anyway, I'll go into that. I don't want. Anyway, uh, by the end of this book, it reminded me why I like it, and it's for the journey of the story. And as far as being a proficient storyteller, I mean, Ken Follett is an amazing writer. His prose is amazing. He does have amazing character development. He has great plotting and pacing, all that stuff. But I am reminded that even though some of these characters maybe didn't have a great development in the story, they're just kind of token characters. Like when I think of the Princess Bride, some of those characters are very one note, but I just love that one note that they play. Like not every character needs to be super developed, but by the end of the story, um, I think that's when you can, or during the story, you can kind of figure if you are enjoying it or not. And if you are enjoying it, that should be the highest, the highest, rubric for how you rate a book, rather than try to check off like, well, how are the promises? How is the foreshadowing? Is this person getting an arc? Is this person getting an arc? Is there a plot hole? And sometimes it does have those issues in a book. But like my grandpa is an amazing storyteller. Just like going over to his house, and he's 101 years old right now, which is like crazy, and he's still telling stories. He still lives at home, and an amazing storyteller. And sometimes he misses some things in the story, or like doesn't sit. It's just sometimes not all the characters have development, but there's power in the story. And I think we kind of nitpick elements of it, and we think, well, this is a bad story because of some little thing that, if you're really looking at it with a critical lens, then you might take yourself out of it without even, before you've even really given it a fair shake. um some things are just crappy prose and crappy one note things and stuff like that, but you got to kind of know what sort of story you're getting into. Like sci-fi is one of my favorite genres, and there's sci-fi that is more like Dune, and like I wouldn't call Star Wars sci-fi just because it's in space. Like that's a fantasy. That's fantasy. But like there's some sci-fi that just has a whole bunch of boring guys in white shirts and ties, like sitting in a NASA launch room, and I can be totally gripped by that story, even though there's not like a romance or a betrayal or a this or a this, but totally gripped by the story of this thing that they are dealing with. And even though Pillars of the Earth, I think, has all of what you would want to find in a great story, as far as like the proficiency in the writing and the prose and the characters and everything, it did also remind me that uh, a good story is just a good story, and why I want to read it. So, or why I love reading. And as I've been writing my own thing, it's also reminded me that the reason I am writing this is because I have a couple, uh, not allegories, but things that are meaningful to me, that I want to express. That goes maybe beyond any individual character, or even the plot itself. Um, Even though I hope it has good plot and good character. A big reason why Lord of the Rings means so much to people is sometimes the meaning behind some of these things. Like a story that, like this one, has a lot about uh, forgiveness, and it could have gone a number of ways with the plot. But I think by the end of it, it could have had any number of characters, and I loved the ones that we got, but um, just the way it was expressed, um, it was just a fantastic story. Fantastic story. I guess what I'm trying to say. That's greater than the sum of its parts, and I think uh, the reason I'm also mentioning this is, like, this is when we read books, we got to remember that we are reading art rather than going in with a clipboard and pointing out little imperfections and things like that, even though they definitely sometimes there are just imperfections in amateur writing and stuff like that. But I think the most important thing that I'm trying to say is we got to remember that why we are reading it is because we want to be transported and we want to enjoy people's art. And I just loved Ken Follett's art here. Um, as far as content things, like I do get sort of like I'm a little bit more sensitive to like sexual violence and overly graphic sexual descriptions and things, and it did have some of that where I was like, oh man. Um, but holy smokes, like what an amazing ride it was, and I think it went from it's based on the years 11. Let me look it up right here. Like it's the first of 5 books, but I know there is a prequel, or first of 4 books, I think. And man, holy smokes, you get some reveals by the end. And then I went to Wikipedia and it was like, did that actually happen? And sure enough, it does. So it starts in 1123 in England and goes all the way to 1174. And I think the next one is in like the 1300s, or and maybe the next is like the 15. And then we get to the 1700s by the 4th book, which I think is like Napoleon. So it goes over a massive. And like the prequel to this that came out, I think, is the 900s. So if you are into historical fiction, I can't recommend it enough. As if you can get through some of that content warning sort of stuff. But man, my first Ken Follett book, and really, 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 really great. And it's greater than the sum of its parts or whatever. Maybe I'm just rambling now. So anyway, I will talk to you guys on another video soon. But I really thought this was a fantastic one, and worth reading slowly and just enjoying the ride. So talk to you soon.